Hello, fellow griever, and welcome to Season 8. We are on Episode 3, and today I'm talking with someone whose work personally made a massive difference in my own healing after suicide loss, and I don't say that lightly. Today I welcome Emily Dziedzic. Emily helps women break free from anxiety, fear, and emotional overwhelm using subconscious rewiring. And when I say subconscious work, I don't mean anything mystical or magical. What I specifically mean is getting down to root patterns that help keep us stuck. The ones you can't talk your way out of, no matter how much you understand your own story, and even how much you understand things that might have worked in the past. I first worked with Emily back in 2021 when I went through her intensive NLP program. That's Neuro Linguistic Programming, if you're not sure what NLP means, and along with small amounts of hypnosis and unconscious mind work. We worked together, and honestly, it was one of the single most transformational things I did. When I felt like I had hit that internal wall, I came to her literally saying, I feel stuck. And I was almost 4 years into my grief journey. It helped me move forward again. It helped me shift things I couldn't think or talk my way through. And it's a big part of what inspired me to become a coach and step into the work that I do today. Emily's approach is grounded, it's practical, and it's incredibly compassionate. She's a trained NLP master coach and hypnotist. She also holds certifications and training in craniosacral therapy, Huna, and Ho'oponopono, integrative hypnosis, and so much more. But what really matters is this. She knows how to help people release the patterns that keep their nervous system stuck in fear or overwhelm. In our conversation today, we talk about your mind and how it can hold you in a place long after your early years of grief, how subconscious patterns form, and how rewiring them gently opens the next chapter of your healing. She also demystifies a little bit of what NLP and hypnosis actually are, and more importantly, sometimes what they aren't. And if you're a griever who's further along and still feeling stuck, or you're craving deeper healing, but you don't know how to get your mind on board, this episode is absolutely for you. And if you're an earlier griever, stick around because there's a lot in this for you as well. Even if working with Emily isn't quite where you are, I think you'll learn a lot. Here is my conversation with Emily. Welcome. A quick note before we start, grievers. I've just opened a very select few one-on-one coaching spots. And if you're a mom and you want focused personal help for life after suicide loss, clarity, pacing, and micro moves that fit a tender nervous system, this might be just what you need. Check out the testimonials on the Leftover Pieces app, and if it resonates, email me for a zero obligation chat about fit and timing. Limited openings, thoughtful pacing, and real support. Hi, Emily. Welcome to the podcast. Welcome back to the podcast.
Hi, Melissa. It's great to be with you again.
Yeah, you too. And for y'all that are listening, especially if you're new to the podcast, Emily was on in season 1, 2021, which feels so long ago now that we recognize that a few minutes ago. So almost 5 years ago. And let her tell us why she's here, what her background is in connection with grief, not necessarily suicide loss, but then what brings you here and how are you grief adjacent, Emily?
I became a coach back in 2020, just by happenstance at the beginning of the pandemic. At the time, I was a massage therapist and was looking to help impact people at a deeper level. I loved the bodywork aspect of it. And with my work, I kept seeking to make a greater impact. And so I was introduced to the world of Neuro Linguistic Programming and hypnosis and a technique called timeline therapy. And I dove into the training. And as it happened, it was in March of 2020. So when I returned home from that training, I couldn't go back to my massage practice because it wasn't legal for me to be in close proximity with people in the way that I had been. In my massage practice, I was focusing on working with people who were grieving. I created a soft space for people to land. And so that was informed by my own experience with grief. I had gone to my massage therapist shortly before my uncle passed away, knowing that I was probably going to be seeing him for the last time. And I just wanted to feel present. I wanted to feel like I could show up for that experience. And when I went to my massage therapist, he asked me all cheerful and bubbly, "How are you doing?" And I burst into tears. And he is lovely and a very skilled therapist, but you could tell that he just had that kind of slowly backing away feeling of like, "Oh, I just did something that made Emily feel uncomfortable." And I realized in that moment, not everybody wants to be dealing with big emotions. And so my practice was really informed around that experience of knowing that when people are grieving, their bodies are tender, their hearts are tender, their minds are tender, and that deserves space. It deserves the opportunity to walk into an office and know that it's okay if you fall apart and it's okay if you don't fall apart. So when my massage practice had to come to a close and I had these new coaching tools, it made sense to dive into doing coaching work with people who were grieving. So my early practice was really informed around all of that experience and allowing me to support people now in their mindset and the unconscious mind portion of their experience rather than their bodies. So I dove into that work and ran that practice for a couple of years. And then as life has it, you're on the twists and turns, and took some time away from my practice to pursue some other ventures, and most recently have returned to my practice with a new layer of coaching information, really focused on the unconscious mind. And the work that I'm doing now really focuses on anxiety and fear and how to rewire those responses at the unconscious level so that we can start doing things differently in our lives.
I love that. And you know that I am a big fan. People that have been around at all with the leftover pieces know that I actually cite our work with, and I worked with Emily when she was an NLP hypnosis timeline therapy coach. And that therapy for me began the biggest shift in transformation that I had had to date in my grieving at the time. And I came to Emily stuck. That was the word. We unwound that, and it wasn't quite as simple as stuck, although I don't know how you make stuck simple, because it can be very complicated, the reasons we feel stuck. And that's what I found. I was 4 years in. I'd had a minor stroke, so my body was keeping the score, even though I wasn't. And the therapy that I did in my own unconscious mind, led by Emily, was so transformative for me. It really was the springboard to everything that came after. The podcast was obviously only 18 episodes in, and now we're hundreds of episodes in. As you sit here with me now, I'd have to look at the number, but it would be really interesting if it was 218, wouldn't it? Instead of just 18 all the way back. But I still talk about the power that had, and that's not to say I haven't gone on to do other work since then. But because that was the first most significant, I still talk about it a lot. I'm always inclined to, and I've become a narrative therapy coach myself on top of being a grief coach, because I believe so strongly in having the correct narratives, which you work with how the brain does that. And we'll dig into that a little bit more. I work in with the narrative side of that, helping ourselves with new verbiage in our head, but then it goes so well with this work that you do and actually helping our unconscious mind catch up to those words that we're telling it, so to speak. You recently had a guest spot inside my community, which was really powerful. Almost all the moms have gone back and listened to the recording now, which is really the ones that couldn't attend. So that's been exciting, because it's something to lean into. When you hear that, I know that on your website now it says stop anxiety in its tracks, rewire fear, or break stubborn habits fast. I'm going to let you speak a little bit to what these 90-minute breakthrough sessions are, But before you do that, maybe step back a second and now fill in what it is exactly, how what you do and when and calling yourself an unconscious mind coach, how that differs from NLP. People are like, "Well, you always say she did NLP. What's the difference?" So maybe speak to the difference in what you do now.
Sure. So, neuro linguistic programming is really understanding the language of the mind. So, in essence, it is unconscious mind work because our language, when we're having conversation like this, it's not like I've written out a script and I know exactly what I'm going to say. This information is all stored at the unconscious level. And in the moment, it comes up through my filters so that I can share that information. But the opposite is also true. We receive information from our five senses, from the external world. But if we had to process every bit of information that actually came to us, we would implode. As human beings, we simply can't do it. So,
Mm-hmm.
what our mind does is it filters that information. We delete, we distort, and we generalize that information so that we can make meaning of it. Now, all of our experiences, everything that we've been through, including things like what language you speak, what your family structure looks like, what your personal values and beliefs are, time, space, matter, all of those things change how we interpret that information. So NLP is really diving into how do we receive information from the outside, filter it through our own experience, and then behave in accordance with all of that information. Now, with NLP as well, we can start to make changes. So we can make changes to the behaviors. We can make changes to our emotional state. We can make changes to our physiology, which then changes how we actually move about the world. Now, with the work that I'm doing now, it's very targeted, looking specifically at the triggers that tip off the chain reaction that we call habits. So it is NLP in essence, but it's really looking at that unconscious programming and how is that playing out in our life now. It's highly targeted. With NLP, we often look at the big picture. We've got core beliefs, and we're acting in accordance with those beliefs. With the work that I'm doing now, I'm looking at the habit pattern. Later on, we can get really curious about the belief that holds it together. But what I'm most interested in now is how can we break that habit as quickly as possible so you get to do something different in your life? Now, anxiety is a bad habit. When I
It
say
is.
that, some people agree wholeheartedly and some people get a little defensive, right?
Because
Because
some
like,
people,
but
let
it's
me guess, because
automatic.
some people say, I don't have any control over that. And I will give an example that I deal with in my world. People saying, joy is never going to happen for me again. And we split hairs on the word joy, happiness, whatever, but those words make early grievers. I mean, I have some listening right now that I'm sure going, yep, I'm there, never going to have joy again, never going to be happy again. And to tell them that it's a choice is really a hard swallow in the beginning. I didn't choose this and I will never be able to be happy again because everything's destroyed. It's the same thinking, right? As far as them thinking anxiety is autonomic and they're thinking sadness is not a choice. And that's
Mhm.
not true.
Even using the word never, I'll
Hmm.
never feel joy again, that's a distortion. So, because joy doesn't feel prevalent, because it's not readily accessible, it can very easily tip over into that universal experience of it'll never happen again. But that's also the filter through which you're currently looking at things.
Hmm.
And those filters change as we change. And so, NLP and the work that I'm doing now is that opportunity to say, oh, I'm noticing that this is a pattern and I don't like this pattern anymore. It doesn't serve me to worst case scenario plan or to avoid certain activities because of feeling uncomfortable. And now, you and I have talked about this quite a bit. There is a difference between early grief and later on down the road grief.
Hmm.
And the work that I do is really designed more for the later on down the road grief. But to speak to the early grief, because I think that's really important too, is the more you take care of your own experience, your own nervous system through the early grief, the more capacity you have for the down the road grief.
Hmm.
And it changes that experience
Yeah.
because you're no longer fighting the current, right? A lot of times I think people feel overwhelmed by big grief, and it's a scary experience. And what the mind does is it says to itself, I'm not safe here. So it goes into lockdown mode, right? We've got our fight or flight system, fight, flight, freeze, fawn. And so when we're operating from that space on an ongoing basis, our mind actually changes as a result of that. So everything that we do is now through that filter.
Mm-hmm.
And so it changes.
Which leads us into what you do now, which is breaking that loop. Talk a little bit about that, the 90-minute breakthrough sessions and how they help identify the trigger, interrupt that loop, and then rewire so you can respond correctly.
When people come to me, they've already identified, I have anxiety about this, or I'm afraid of this, right? So the work that I'm doing isn't necessarily uncovering where it's showing up in somebody's life. It's that recognition of, I know I'm anxious to go to the grocery store. Let's say we'll just use that as an experience. Because I know for a lot of people, going to the grocery store is actually a really big grief trigger.
I was going to say that's really big for moms because we shop for, suddenly you're faced with, oh, I don't have to buy the Pop-Tarts. Or you see the next door neighbor or the child's soccer player mom, or the grocery store is a nightmare for many, many grievers. So you're right.
And so there's also that part of your mind that says, and I know that it is the grocery store, right? So now you've kind of got this internal battle of the conscious thought process, which says, I can go in and I can buy the fruits and vegetables that I need to prepare dinner tonight, and I will, for all intents and purposes, be safe. And then the other part of you that is in that habit pattern, in that loop of, I think about going to the grocery store and I feel that swell of anxiety that comes up, right? For me, anxiety, I just often describe it for myself as a zipper, right? You've got this zipper of emotion that zoop, all of a sudden your heart is pounding, your hands are sweating, you've got shakiness in your voice or tightness in your chest, whatever the symptoms are. So when people come to me, they say, I'm ready to break out of that habit. I'm ready to see the grocery store as a place where I go in and I have a transaction. I pick up items, I pay for items, I go home. And so what we do inside of this work is we look at the first moment that anxiety gets tipped off. I think about it like the first domino in the chain of events called anxiety. It is a slippery slope. You think about going to the grocery store and now you're feeling anxiety as if you're in the parking lot, even though you're at home just making a grocery list. So what we're doing is we're looking to break that pattern, right? If you think about it like sledding down a snowy hill, the first person who goes down that hill in their tube has a lot of friction, right? There's no set path yet. But the next person who goes down and follows that same path, they go a little bit faster, and so on and so forth until that is a well-worn groove down that hill. It's that easy to think of an event and be at the bottom of the hill before you even know it. So we're looking to stop that, put up roadblocks where we need them, but bring new resources to that moment. So instead of going down that slippery slope that's well worn, we go in a new direction. And what that's doing is it's called a prediction error, because our brain and our mind runs on prediction. If it happened once in the past and you survived it, then your mind says, oh, this was successful. So if I get nervous before I go to the grocery store and I leave the grocery store successfully, then I did a good job. So the work that I'm doing is breaking up that habit pattern to say, oh, actually, we can predict a different outcome. So what we do is we say, when was the last time specifically that you felt anxiety about going to the grocery store? And client will say, oh, last week when I was getting ready to go to the grocery store, all of a sudden my heart was pounding and my hands were sweating and I had to talk myself into going. I say, okay, well, what was the exact thing, the exact moment where something happened, you saw something, you heard something, you said something to yourself that started that chain reaction? So for some people, it might be writing out a list. For some people, it might be actually getting into the vehicle to drive to the grocery store. For some people, it might be parking in the parking lot and walking into the grocery store. whatever it is, no judgment on where that trigger exists. It's just identifying where it is. Because if we can target it at that point, then the chain reaction doesn't stand a chance to run once we re-resource it. So then what I do in the session is, because we've now identified that triggering moment, you're probably feeling those feelings, because our mind doesn't know the difference between what's real and what's imagined at some level, right? Yes, we're sitting here having this conversation. And if I think about going to the grocery store, I know I'm not actually going to the grocery store, but the mind is preparing as if you are. And so I teach tools. They're called self-directed neuroplasticity. Fancy word for saying I'm going to put up a roadblock and bring my system back down to baseline. So fight or flight gets activated, and then we can bring it back down to a place of reason. And that's the parasympathetic nervous system. We make good decisions from that place of reason. We don't make good decisions once our fight or flight has been activated. So I teach very practical tools in the moment, things that you can do in order to bring your system back down to that baseline. Then what we do is we look at, how do you want to feel instead? For most people, it's, I want to feel clear and calm or confident. I want to feel like I'm in charge. And so we build that resource up in the system, because just as much as we can feel anxiety, we can feel powerful. We can feel confident. We just don't have it linked. So we build that up. And sometimes it's noticing where we feel confident in our life outside of this experience. Maybe it's, you were very active in sports and you feel great when you're on the soccer field, or maybe it's you're really good at your job, or just, you were on vacation, walking down the beach, feeling good about yourself, whatever it is. We build that resource up in the system, and then I bring you back to that trigger moment, having you imagine what it's like to write out your grocery list, having you imagine what it's like to pull into the parking lot of the grocery store. And what happens is that's the prediction error. We're bringing synapses together that have never met in that context before. And we copy it and paste it and copy it and paste it and copy it and paste it until that old reaction isn't accessible anymore. And instead, you look at your grocery list and you feel ready to go to the grocery store. And so it feels really simple and it feels sort of sensational when you describe it that way, but the mind adopts that new resource at that place, and you just get to be different the next time it happens. It's really powerful stuff.
It is. So when you talk about the old reaction just isn't there anymore, it made me think of something. It made me think about I know what I was starting to say a minute ago. You talked about what you do now essentially being like a cousin of NLP. It's not outside of the house. It's in a different room, so to speak. So it's still in the same, because it feels almost like this is more targeted, maybe not as broad, when you really do know that thing where when we worked on NLP, I came to you with that broad term of stuck. So we had to unwind, and we spent like 12 weeks together at once a week for hours at a time, uncovering what was going on in the stuckness. What you're doing now is more targeted of, if I was here now, it would be me saying this one specific thing is what's causing an issue. Say, when the phone rings, I'm worried that it's going to be my mother, like that kind of thing. Like for me, we uncovered that some of my issues were that I didn't feel like I was enough, which was still tied to residual things from my childhood that were tied directly to a dysfunctional relationship with a very narcissistic, domineering, unhealthy mother. And so we had to uncover that, though. I didn't come to you and say, I have a lot of issues surrounding my mother, and when the phone rings, it activates that. Now you would be able to say, okay, let's talk about when the phone rings, how you don't go, what if that's my mom, right? So I do want to go back to, though, because the underlying part of what this is doing to the loop and how this works on our parasympathetic nervous system and gets us to a healthier space. The work that we did together once we uncovered everything and did all that was transformative to me. It truly was. A lot of it played into my life and the decisions I made later, but there was this outlying piece that until recently, I didn't have any empirical evidence to say whether it had truly helped in my relating to her at all, because she has essentially been not somebody who's been a part of my life since very shortly after my son died. And because that stayed true until about a month and a half ago, I didn't have that evidence. So when there came a time that I knew I was going to need to interact with her. And I was working with my brother. We were working to get her into a facility because of her age. And I had no more anger towards her. All the work we had done just kind of wiped that away. But then when this came up, Emily, and I knew I was going to be speaking to her, and it was the day before, I remember saying to my husband, "What have I done? I'm opening Pandora's box. This is going to unwind me. What am I doing inviting the devil into the den, so to speak?" And so I worked myself up in anticipation, thinking that the automatic reaction I would have would be overwhelming anxiety and all sorts of things that would have been old. Because even though I had retrained the loop, I still had memories of what I used to respond to like, and didn't have anything for 9 years to base that on, or for at least 5 since we'd worked together. And then I had a conversation with her, and it lasted all of 15 or 20 minutes. And I hung up, and I remember I looked at my husband and I said, "Huh." And he said, "What?" And I said, "It didn't go much different than I thought it would. And yet the way I feel is not at all the way I anticipated feeling." I didn't feel any reaction at all. Like my brain could process what we had said, but my emotional system was completely intact. Like I wasn't having all of those things I thought I was going to have. And I just kind of went, "I'll be damned." I mean, because even though I knew it had worked from a living with the memory standpoint and all of that and letting that be intrusive, I hadn't had to be one-on-one in a situation with her. And so it was transformative. I'm only saying that to not only help you as a practitioner, because we like to hear back that things have made a difference. I also am saying it for everybody to listen that's listening, saying this isn't just me going, "Oh, it made me feel better." It really rewired something in my nervous system. And that's not to say that after 3 weeks of heavily dealing with it with my brother and with her, in a very overwhelming by the amount of time and interaction it was taking, that I'm not exhausted at this point. Because I am. And, we've got her in there and now we're on the downside slope of it. It wasn't exhausting in the way that it would have been before. I probably wouldn't have made it 3 weeks. I might not have made it 3 days because it would have been too activating. I would have been triggered. I would have responded to her. I would have reacted to her versus responding to her. And it probably would have been ugly. And it's been none of those things. No, it's not fun. It's not been fun. I don't kid yourself, but it's not been ugly and I'm intact.
Yeah.
So huge.
I love that.
Yeah, such a huge so therefore, when people hear me get up on little pedestals, because I do sometimes about unconscious mind work, I do about narrative therapy, I do about community. There's a few things I will stand on a pedestal about. It's because I truly believe in them. It's not because someone's saying, "Here, please push this," or "This is the latest, greatest thing." It's because I've seen it work and in myself. So I just thought that would be a nice interjection at this point to kind of share not only with you, but with everybody listening that, boy, it matters to get into that unconscious mind.
I love that. And it's such a great example of how neurologically linked so many things inside of our experience are. So you came to me with the feeling of being stuck. Now, the way that I used to approach work was the bottom-up approach. What we did was take stuck, which is a surface level, not to diminish it, but complaint about what was happening in your life, right? That was the problem, is I feel stuck. And we had to drill down and get down to the very bottom of what the actual issue was in order to then essentially heal everything from the bottom up. Now, that has neurological linkage to all sorts of things that you and I never were able to even talk about in the time that we had together. But your mind, because it unlinked whatever it was down at that bottom, at the root of the issue, everything that was associated with that is also impacted. Now, the work I'm doing is top down. So instead of going all the way down into that root core issue, we're looking at that surface level trigger. So it still has that neurological impact of, I think about it like the stem of a bunch of grapes. So instead of going down to that first grape at the bottom and pushing it upwards, we're starting at the top and allowing it to trickle down. And I always tell my clients, I have no idea how this is going to impact the rest of your life. I just know that it will. So if we work on that issue of anxiety around going to the grocery store, Do you show up different at work? Do you have a different experience in other settings because your mind now knows and understands that linkage in a different way? And
Well,
that's the stuff that I really love about this work is that we might start with one issue, but then the mind is going to adapt. It's plastic, it's malleable, it's going to change for the better as a result of that work.
yeah, and a way that I can think to apply that to people listening and trying to unwind the pieces. For example, there's one of the trickle down effects could be you've helped that reaction that you have to the going to the grocery store. So therefore, the thought of going to the grocery store for Thanksgiving could be completely changed, which then could change your entire tone and mood around Thanksgiving. I mean, I'm not trying to make it seem more important than it is, but just what feels like a tangible thing with many grievers sitting here anticipating things like Thanksgiving, it made me think that something as small as that kind of thing can have a trickle effect into other areas that we don't anticipate. I'm not saying it would fix everything we have about Thanksgiving because it may not, but I'm just saying, could it trickle into different areas because it's just the grocery store, right? Sure, it could. Absolutely.
Mhm.
Yeah, it can really have that effect. So, who is this work for, and when does it help the most, Emily?
So, the work that I'm doing now is most helpful for people who have gone through the initial grief phase. There's something about that grieving space that feels sacred, that it shouldn't be rushed. It's not something to overcome. It is the opportunity for your mind to make sense of the thing that doesn't make sense. And that process really can't be rushed. And so the work that I do now is really for the people who have gone through that initial grieving phase and they're looking at their life now saying, I'm ready to take a look at what my next steps are. And I'm noticing that these patterns are unhelpful. I'm feeling either a whole lot of anxiety about something, fear around something. I feel stuck in patterns of thought that don't feel helpful anymore, or people who, and it can be as broad as what you brought to the table of I feel stuck. Now, I just approach it slightly differently of when was the last time you wanted to do something and you felt stuck, right? In what context are you feeling stuck? So we can do a little discovery around that. But it's really for the people who have moved through the majority of that really hefty phase of grief and are ready to start redesigning their life in a way that feels connected and congruent for their next steps.
Yeah, that makes total sense to me and is a way to look at it that feels healthy for everybody that's listening. I also know that there are many early grievers listening and they may think this kind of thing sounds like it could help in earlier grief to help maybe overcome guilt around certain things and stuff like that. But yet they're still so early and raw that they're not ready to work with somebody like you that wants to pinpoint the top grape. So, what sort of resources could people look at? Do you have any resources that people could look at?
Yeah, so I do have a portal of 9 different self-directed neuroplasticity tools. So we talked about that very briefly at the beginning, but what that basically means is I'm noticing that I'm in an experience that feels overwhelming for my system. There's no real direct benefit from being in that experience. So we know that emotions come and go. They're not permanent. We have the ebbs and the flows and the swells of our feelings. So creating nervous system safety around that experience can be really helpful. So these 9 tools, and it is designed really specifically to target anxiety, but can be used for any big emotion, is the way for you to work with your system to help bring you back down to baseline. So it's things like how to take a breath that's actually effective for your system, shifting into peripheral vision. There's a technique in there called bilateral stimulation. What happens a lot of times when we have big emotion, whether it's sadness or anger or anxiety, that emotion ends up taking over the capacity of the mind. So you've got anxiety that's firing in one part of your brain, and now everything else kind of goes offline in favor of that experience. So bilateral stimulation, and I can just talk through the actual technique. If you take an object in one hand, like a chapstick or a pen or like your AirPods charging case, and you start passing it back and forth from your left hand to your right hand, crossing the midline of your body, just back and forth, finding a nice rhythm with that passing, what that's doing is it's stimulating both sides of your brain. When both sides of your brain come back online in the firing, then that intensity around whatever the emotional experience was lessens. And so you're saying to the brain, oh, don't forget, we have all of these other resources. We're actually sitting in this room, in this space, on a chair or wherever you're seated, and reminds your system, yes, those emotions are big and I'm okay. I'm actually safe in this moment. And it helps reduce that intensity, bringing you back down to baseline, where you can then have some reasoning again. Right? Like I said earlier, we don't make good decisions in the peak of an emotional experience. And so those emotions absolutely need to run through your system. I think about it like metabolizing them, right? If we stuff them down, they just come back later. So we need to move through them in a healthy way. The more safety we build into the system as we're moving through big emotions, the easier it is to move through those emotions. So the self-directed neuroplasticity tools can be really helpful. It's teaching you very practical ways to manage your emotional experience so that you can actually move through the emotions rather than compartmentalizing. A lot of people say to me, oh, I just put that aside because I don't have time for it, or I don't want to deal with it, or I'll deal with it later. But what that's doing is signaling to the mind, I'm not safe enough to feel these feelings. So then they get stuffed down below our conscious awareness. I'm sure we've all had this experience. You spill your glass of milk and suddenly all of the emotion that you haven't been feeling comes exploding to the surface, right? It's never about the spilled milk. It's about everything that you've been holding on to for far too long.
Now, in looking at your website and you talking about the tools, the anxiety, is that the anxiety meet your match? Is that the 9 tools?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay, that's what I thought. So right now you have a few options. You have anxiety meet your match, which is these 9 neuroplastic tools that you're talking about, which is super, super affordable and super accessible to everybody that's listening, regardless of where they're at in their grief journey. Your one session shift, your 90 minutes where they can work with you one-on-one, is more for people that are ready to target that top grape, if we will, type of situation, or the stem, and work their way down. And I know there may be some other things at some point, but right now, are those the two things that you're offering for people if they want to work with you?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, those are
Perfect.
my two options. I feel like the self-directed neuroplasticity is it's almost like how to be a human when it comes to your emotions, right? How do we actually use our mind in a way that feels like we are making change, right? Most people feel like the more they understand a system, the more leverage they have over a system, right? Our mind is the same way. So it's kind of baseline education of how do we actually feel our feelings. And then once I work with somebody inside of the one session shift, if there is an opportunity or a need for ongoing work, we discuss it at that point. But I like that one session shift as a let's get you out of the pattern that you're in. And then we can talk about where are you in your process? What do you want for your life? And are ongoing options of support helpful for you at this phase? So that's how I approach things. Essentially, that's the prerequisite. If we do work beyond that, it would be that it was in alignment for the both of us moving forward.
Yeah, that makes sense. There's things that aren't necessarily tied to my coaching, but that might be follow up to coaching, and that's dependent upon the client work. But I do think, I want to make sure, because I know my listeners have been hearing me talk about the fact that I now do one on one coaching and have 2 proprietary programs I've built. Soul Tides, which is the program for people that are a little farther in griefs, it works so well with this type of work. It complements what you do so well. And I have referred people to other types of, from brain spotting to all in the unconscious mind work, that are at a place that they're working through things deeper with me on the more emotional front of the brain, daily life situations, narrative therapy, rewiring or retraining their brain. But this is just for me it's a quicker path, what you offer. I feel like I deal with the bigger picture, and then you kind of help deal with some of the smaller pieces of that to solidify it. Because it doesn't, you have to have the machine and then you have to have all the parts of the machine, right? So I kind of help with some of the overall parts because, there's a community piece, there's all these pieces, and then there's the wiring. And this really helps complement that. And quite a few people that have been through my coaching sessions are now looking to complement that work with this type of thing. Yeah, I think they can work really well together. I've been scrawling things down on my paper as we talk, wanting to make sure I don't forget anything. I feel like we've touched on almost everything I thought we were going to talk about. What about you? Is there anything you feel like that we haven't talked about or said that you want to be sure you add for people that are listening?
Yeah, I think a point that I really just want to emphasize, there's two things. When we look at our mind, our conscious thought process and our conscious mind is 5% of our total operating system. And our unconscious mind is the remaining 95%. Now, there's certain things inside of our unconscious mind, like our autonomic nervous system, that, it just takes up a certain amount of bandwidth, right? We're not thinking about beating our hearts and we're not thinking about pumping our lungs to get enough air into our system. The majority of our experience is unconscious. Everything that we do is a habit. From the moment we get out of bed in the morning or hit snooze on our alarm, we're running habit patterns because we need to have efficiency. If we had to actually think about everything that we did, it would take up too much space, and that 5% of our conscious mind would be depleted all the time. So the first piece is just starting to notice, what about my life is functioning well, and what part of my life could use a tune-up? And as soon as you have awareness around it, it means that you've moved it from the unconscious mind up to the conscious mind. But the second point that I want to make about that is we can't think our way out of a problem. If we could think our way out of our problems, we would have thought our way out of it by now, right? So that replaying and rehashing and I think about it like you're sort of fitting yourself into all of the crevices, right? Trying to think about all of the potential outcomes, thinking that you're being prepared for something. It doesn't actually change how we're neurologically wired for the better. And oftentimes that thought process, that overthinking, worst case scenario planning, looking at the snow globe from all of the different angles actually wires the problem tighter. Because what we're saying to the mind is, oh, this is important. We need to be quote unquote prepared, right? There's something dangerous about this situation and we need to spend a certain amount of time or hypervigilance in that experience. So what we're saying to the mind is, oh, this is important. Keep feeling anxious about it. Keep overthinking this problem and overthinking it to a point that we can resolve it. But that's the trap because we can't actually resolve it by thinking about it. So if you find yourself in those loops, thinking more about it doesn't necessarily get you out of it. And so that really is the difference between I'm processing that bigger picture. And I think, like you said, there are so many therapies and they all have their places. And I don't think it's a one-size-fits-all solution. Because if it was, we'd all do it and everybody would be on the other side of traumatic experiences.
We'd all be living in rainbow land, right?
Yeah, it's so much more nuanced than that. And what works for somebody at a certain phase is different than what works with somebody else. And that's okay. And I think that's the beauty of having so many different options. But the work that I'm doing really focuses on that piece of I keep noticing that I'm doing the same thing over and over and over again, expecting a different result, but that result hasn't come yet. Right. And so that's where I come in of let's just break that all together and make sure that instead of trying to think your way out of it, we just rewire your way out of it.
Yeah. I love that. I love it so much. And I feel like we could just talk and talk and talk about it, but I love where we're at. I feel like we've hit all these important points. I feel like we've kind of demystified it a little bit, although it's still such a mystery how our mind works, right?
For sure.
Oh.
I think we know just a fraction of how our mind works at this point.
But the better we become, I've had people say even recently, holy cow, when am I going to stop collecting tools for surviving this in my world with everybody listening, surviving this loss? And I say, think about a master mechanic who he doesn't have the one little toolbox he started with in mechanic school or when his uncle was training him or however he learned. He now has a whole wall full of toolboxes. And do you think he uses every single one of those tools or drawers all the time? No, some are every day. And some might be once a year. Some might be once a project, but they're all there when he needs them. And he's a master of his craft. If we are going to become masters of our life, i.e., masters of our own mind, it's a lifelong journey of collecting tools. It isn't like you said, one size fits all, or, oh, I've got the 10 tools I need. Now life is good. How big of a master of your own life and your own destiny do you want to be? And that's when you keep seeking answers and solutions and therapies and tools. We'll just call them tools, because the more we know, the better we can do.
Right. And I always tell people too that our relationship with ourselves is the longest relationship we will ever have with anybody. We are with ourselves from the moment we're born until the moment that we die. And what better way to move through life than to know and understand who you are and how you operate so that you can step into whatever is next for you.
Exactly. Well, thank you for being a part of that for me. Thank you for everything that you do. And thank you for being here today.
Thank you for trusting me with your journey. And thank you for having me back. It was wonderful to have this conversation.
And if anybody has any questions at all on how to reach Emily, where to reach Emily, the things that she does, it's all in the show notes. She is also on my resources page in the coaches section. My resources are divided into 4 categories. So she's under the coaches area. If you want to find her that way, you can as well. So both of those places. And it's really easy, emilydziedzic.com. But everybody can't always spell your name, so we'll point them to the links. But there's lots of places that they can find you from the show notes to my website. So
Wonderful.
Thank you so much. Have a good day, and we'll talk soon, ma'am.
Sounds great. Thank you.
Bye. So thank you for joining me today, Grievers. If today's episode resonated with you, please consider subscribing to get weekly updates when I drop new episodes. And please take a moment to rate and review the podcast with 5 stars, especially on Apple Podcasts. Your support helps so much because it's how others are able to find the podcast and this community. Remember, though it may feel impossible now, hope and healing are within reach. I invite you to connect further by visiting my website, theleftoverpieces.com, where you'll find support, legacy options, retreats, resources, online Zoom groups, and so much more. Together, we can navigate this journey of healing. We can put our hearts, our leftover pieces, back together. And as they say here in Puerto Rico, poco a poco, juntas podemos. Little by little, together we can. Take care and talk soon.